All right, 12 o'clock Central Standard Time here on Twitch. That means for Green Oaks Gaming. We are live in the studio doing some painting. And just that mic there a little bit. Busy day, busy day, busy day. Of course, we've got a little bit in the chat going on. Make sure that you type in a number for what you think we should paint kind of in mass next. It's not the end all be all. We're going to be painting a lot of different things, but I've got multiple miniatures that are villagers. I've got a lot of different spiders, a giant and gargantuan, I would say, giant rats. I've got a lot of different mycenoids that are like mushroom people. I've got turtles. I've got a dragon turtle and a giant turtle, and then a lot of goblins. So these will be things that we paint in mass. So make sure you put number 1 for villagers, number 2 for spiders, number 3 for rats, number 4 mycenoids, number 5 turtles, or number 6 goblins, and vote away. That's not what we're going to be painting on the stream today. I've got a couple of things kind of in prep that we're going to be working on a little bit. I have been really focused on ReaperCon entries as of late. So the miniatures that we finished over the past couple of streams are uploaded on Instagram. You can check out my Instagram there and see what we have been painting and some of the things that we've gotten over the finish line. Today you can see a couple of things on the table that are kind of in process, in various stages of process. Some of them are actually off screen, but I've got a Cyclops, I've got a zombie giant, I've got a dire cabbage. This is more just a fun one. I've got a demon queen. I've got a giant otter. And I've got this beautiful sculpt here, which is a drow elf with some skeletons. And so that's kind of the focus. We're going to be working on some of these just to have some stuff to be streaming today. While we've got paint drying, I do have some miniatures that are bagged. These are out of Reaper's Kickstarter Bones 5.5. So the dragon turtle, I've got a fire giant, and I have got a gargantuan spider. So we may be doing some assembly as well, but I wanted to kind of kick off and start today working on this beautiful sculpt here, just because I've got it all base coated, got it all cleaned up and then base coated, of course. And I want to get some paint on it. It's been sitting on my shelf for almost a year without getting any paint. And it is a larger sculpt that I am very much in love with. So I'm going to be working on this quite a bit today in our stream. I suppose I better take off my glasses so that I can see up close. And I'm actually going to, the way I paint minis can really vary from mini to mini. This one has so much going on to it, which is partly why I have not put any paint on it, because it's sometimes some of these more elaborate miniatures can just be overwhelming on where do you start, what do you do, and how do you go about getting that paint on there and nice and clean. So I figured, you know what, I'm done screwing around. I want to get some paint on this miniature, so I am going to start just by applying some pure black. And I am using a Reaper paint of pure black, and I'm just going to start on the base. I've got a little bit of handshake today, so It's not going to be super clean, but this is going to allow me to paint with my bits of hand shaking because this is a larger area. I'm going to be able to get some paint down on the base, do some dry brushing on the base, and then as I paint the elements that are included on the base, there are some bones and weapons and things like that. I can be more careful and keep the base relatively clean and clean up any of the stray bits that I get because of my handshake. I want to start kind of deep in here. Some of these areas, because this is all assembled, I did not start painting it pre-assembly because it was mostly assembled when I purchased the miniature. Getting into some of the elements and areas is a little bit of a challenge, so I'm not going to be able to be as clean on this element. So painting this up is definitely going to be a little bit more challenging, but not too bad. Basically what I want to do is paint areas where I'm super comfortable the colors will stay, I guess is the best word for it. So the ground and the rocks primarily are what I'm most focused on. And I'm starting with black because I want this to be a very dark miniature. A very, I hate to say Halloween-y, but very much Halloween kind of feel to it. So very dark in tone on the base. I want it to look almost graveyard-like. So by putting black down, I can go through and then do some dry brushing of dark browns for a dirt effect that will look really good. And then that, we can build up the earth tones and grays in the rocks. So gray rocks, brown earth, and then of course the rocks will have a couple of different tones in them as well, just to make them a little more natural looking, I guess is the best word. But I want to start them all out as black so that I've got one good solid tone for the deepest, darkest shadow areas, so that it blends really nice and well from rock to earth. And then of course, as we finish the painting and everything, we will also add some flocking to it. To continue to bring it up to a really cool, organic look and feel. But I really want to focus on the deep areas that are going to be the most challenging to paint. So any of these undercut areas, I want to try to paint black, so that then as we dry brush on top of it with our grays and browns, we've got our shadows already built in. The beautiful thing about this is you don't have to have the steadiest moment of hands, Like I said, today I've got a lot of shake in my hands. Part of getting older. Sometimes it comes, sometimes it goes. So you have to be able to plan accordingly based on the conditions that you're going to be painting in. And the black base color is an easy one to compensate with because I've got large areas. If I shake, it's going to be cleaned up when my hands are steadier and I'm able to start focusing on other elements of the miniature. But the entire base will be black. I'm not going to paint it all because I'm not going to put this on a handle. I'm just going to be holding the base as much as possible. Just because I don't have a handle that's beefy enough to hold this much weight of a miniature, if I have a handle and I try to angle it, it's going to fall off any type of a handle that I have. So with ReaperCon coming up, it is the Labor Day weekend. It officially kicks off on the Thursday before Labor Day. But there is a meet and greet the Wednesday before Labor Day at Reaper's headquarters in Denton, Texas, which I will be there for that. If you will be there as well, make sure you stop and say hello. And then Thursday proper, be at the Denton Convention Center. Thursday, I believe I've got 2 classes I am teaching. The rest of the time, I believe I will be at the Artists Alley. I have not confirmed that yet. Of course, who knows, time will tell. There may be times where I'll jump into the hobby hijinks and just chat with people and work on some painting. You can see with my hand shaking how it's not super clean. Again, that's okay because we're going to go through after we get all of this black on and some dry brushing elements into this aspect. We'll go through and do a lot of cleanup on the miniature as we are painting the other elements. Knowing your limits and adjusting accordingly is the biggest benefit to miniature painting. I sometimes, especially in like classes and stuff, because I focus on many of my classes anyhow, focus on more detailed work, things like painting eyes, smooth blending, things like that. I often get asked how to compensate for shaky hands, and to tell you the truth, I'm not the best person to offer any real input on that. For me, I don't use any type of medication for that. I have on occasion tried, there is a rubber band technique where you can use a rubber band and kind of rubber band your fingers together to give you a little more stable base in your fingers. All different types of techniques that exist and are out there, but I, for one, find that I just adjust what I'm painting according to the stability of my hands. I have been lucky so far that my hand shaking kind of comes and goes, and it's not so severe that I can't hold a brush. I would say if you are looking at miniature painting and have severe hand shaking or anything, of course the best thing to do is talk to your doctor. Maybe something that they can assist with some type of a prescription or exercise maybe. It's hard to say, but because I am not a doctor, I don't weigh too heavy in on the subject. It's because the last thing I want to do is give horrible advice. Sometimes these larger minis, like I said, for me are the best option because they've just got so much to do that if my hand shakes while I'm applying paint, it's not going to impact the final product. It allows me to get some paint applied and to get the miniature underway so I can come back to it and still make the best use of my time. This last week, finished a number of miniatures. Again, those are posted on my Instagram if you want to check them out. Some very fun and interesting ones. I had one. The miniature is sculpted by Christine Van Patten for Reaper Miniatures. It's called Rask Hairfolk, and I used it to make a player character and then painted the miniature. It was actually one that I had no real intention of painting. I had bought a couple of them to use as giveaways, and it really just did not intend to ever paint the miniature, either one of them. I actually bought 6, and we used one for a show where we did a drinking and painting game. So 2 of them got used there. Then, like I said, I did the one PC and painted it. I actually had a lot of fun with that miniature. I did not think I was going to, just because I'm not really big into, like, I call them animorphs, I don't know, but bestial characters, I suppose, for the most part when I'm painting miniatures, because I always try to paint what I'm going to use at my tabletop. So I never intended to paint it, but I actually painted it and really enjoyed it. The character that I made based off the miniature, I actually really enjoyed as well. The backstory I thought was delightful. A lot of fun to do. So he is actually going to be an NPC in a couple of my games, and a lot of fun. A lot of fun. I offered the character for a group that does streaming games to utilize as NPCs as well, or as an NPC as well, and just a lot of fun. Just a lot of fun. So surprisingly, I did not think I would be into it, and really enjoyed it. Trying to get to a couple of these areas. A little challenging. May have to do a wash. some of those deeper set areas. Basically what I want to do is get all of this black applied, give it a moment to dry, and then see if I've gotten good enough coverage. And then evaluate how my handshaking is going and seeing about doing some of the initial detail work following along. If not, then I'll probably just continue to do some of the base coating, larger aspects of base coating for the skeletons and the elf. But again, we'll see. Just take it moment by moment. And maybe in between, do some assembly on some of those Bones 5.5 miniatures that were received, and see how it goes. Of course, one of the big pros on this large of a miniature is when you start painting in an area and then move on to another to let that dry, it dries pretty fast. So coverage wise, it's not like we've got to set this down for multiple minutes to let paint dry. For the most part, just move from one section to the next. For some reason earlier I panicked, I don't know why, but I thought the time was much later than it actually was. So I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be late, and I still had about 40 minutes to go. So it was kind of nice. Allowed me to do a little bit more prep work and clean up because my area was pretty dirty. Just prepping for ReaperCon, I just have a lot of stuff all over my work area. So to one side, it's just very cluttered. Very cluttered. Area here that's kind of tucked in, the last kind of tucked in central area, and we're able to get it nicely. This miniature, like I said, I've had it for almost a year and have not gotten any paint on it up until today, as far as like actual paint. I did airbrush it to get the base coat on. But aside from that aspect, this is the first actual layer of paint we've painted on it. So I'm very excited. I've got a real good clear vision of what I want to see in this miniature in my mind. And it's always a challenge because you get these ideas in your mind and you want it to come out perfect. I've been painting long enough now to where I know that that vision that I have, I'm not ever going to get it perfect. So the goal is how close can I get it to the vision in my head. It's one of those catch-22s. But the biggest thing to know is that you are your own worst critic. So as you're working on your miniature too, don't hesitate to post up some works in progress, some WIPs, and get feedback. Of course, some of it you got to take with a grain of salt. Some of it you really want to listen to and pay attention to. And be open to criticism, of course. But also look for that positive feedback that is going to help elevate your painting. Of course, for me, I try to get as much feedback as I can. And then sift through what's most helpful, what's most beneficial, what am I not seeing, what am I missing, how can I improve, and where can I really step up my game. So many elements of this miniature that I think are so cool. The broken sword here that I'm painting around, that's being held by a skeletal hand. So cool. There is also a sword into the ground. Very cool. The primary figure, of course, that elf woman, just absolutely gorgeous, beautifully sculpted. I painted a bust of her. It's been a little bit now, a few months anyhow, and just an absolutely gorgeous sculpt. I love the way she's kind of pulled the head off one of the risen skeletons and is gazing into its eye sockets. Just really cool. The gravestones, also well sculpted, very unique too in some aspects. Just a lot of detail on them. First, when I first saw this miniature, I didn't really look too close at it. I thought it was more like a battlefield where these skeletons were rising up out of the ground. I didn't really pay attention to the gravestones, but it is a grave. I thought it was like a battlefield with these swords in the earth and such, scattered bones around. And it didn't take me long to realize that, it had these gravestones and such. But initially I was thinking of it as though it was like an ancient battlefield where this gal was raising the dead from this ancient battlefield. So I was trying to think, how can I make the ground be rocky but muddy, and have the armor be more new and shining, but with traces of blood and the horrors of battle. But now I've got a clear idea in my mind that I want this to be more old and ancient, with lots of worn stone, rust, fabric kind of rotting away. And there's our black. Nice and applied. Now I just want to go through and look for areas where could I have missed. So move it around in the light, looking for that ghoul skin color. Kind of poking through. It's a little challenging because I've got some gleam yet from the wet paint. But overall, first initial pass, it looks pretty good. So I'm going to give that a moment to dry. And while that's drying, let's start working a little bit of assembly and cleanup. I'm going to move old Cyclops back, move our zombie and our dire cabbage back. So this is one of the miniatures that I was able to pick up out of Bones 5.5. Now this was actually from Bones 4, I believe. It might have been Bones 3, but anyhow, a previous Bones Kickstarter that I did not get, and I have wanted it for quite a while. It's a beautifully sculpted miniature. You can see lots and lots of components there. I'm going to grab a drink real quick. So you can see where the stand goes. I believe it is, yep, this aspect there. The stand that goes into the bottom of the shell. So basically what I want to do is test fit items first. So that stand also then goes into the base. It looks like a lot of different components onto the base. You can see there are a number of pieces on these plinths. I want to get my clippers and just start clipping away a little bit. Some of these aspects, and I'm not going to throw them away yet. You can see a couple of things broke off, or at least one thing broke off there. But I'm not going to clean that up just yet. Again, I'm just looking at test fitting. And really, it's a stupid, simple process. I just want to find where things sit and test fit them in. So what I want to do is look for how well they sit in and settle. You can see quite a bit of gapping in here, which means most likely we'll need to do a hot water treatment. A little bit of bend, a little bit of bend. You can see some aspects that are not super clean. And again, just finding your elements, doing a test fit. We're doing the base first. There we go. And of course, many of the elements do have these bits of pinning. So you should not have to, on the Bones product anyhow, really do a lot of pinning itself. Though you may, depending on weight and how things fit together and how stable things are, you may want to do some additional pinning, but it'll vary. So looking at our base, I mean, definitely some gapping. Now I haven't glued anything in yet, and again, I don't really plan to yet. I just want to test fit things. So quite a bit of gapping here and there. And that's pretty common for a couple of reasons. One, because they're kind of stored, sorted, and shipped from Texas. You get a lot of heat. I live in Texas, get a lot of heat. So there's a lot of bending that goes on. So the easiest process to do is what's called the hot water method for bones, especially larger bones like this where you've got a little more pliability to the material. What I'll do is I'll get a pot and I'll fill it about half full of hot water. And then I'll put it on the stove and I'll get it up to a rolling boil. And then I'll dip all of these in and I'm going to boil them for 3 minutes. And then I'm going to pull them out and I'm going to put them into a bowl with ice water. So, and then I'm going to let them sit there for about 15 minutes before I pull them out, dry them off, and test fit again. So the process is you want these pieces to go into the boiling water and you want to let them boil for about 3 minutes so it gets all the way to the core. You want even heating from the surface all the way into the core of the thing, and you want it to have a good consistent temperature. That is going to allow them to assume the shape that they have from the mold. So generally your molds will have a better fit, right? To where you don't have as much gapping. When you pull them out of that boiling water and put them right into your ice water, at that point it's going to shock them in that form that they revert to from the mold. So their actual form, it's going to shock them. So your outside is going to set really fast and then it's going to cool them into the core. So you're going to have more rigidity from the outside in, and it will help hold them in that proper form, in that proper shape. Now there are times that doesn't work perfectly and you have to re-dip them in your boiling water, boil them and then manipulate them very carefully, of course, because as you pull them out they are boiling hot, but very carefully manipulate them into the proper shape to be able to fit to then glue in place. So it's a little bit of a I hate to say art, but a little bit of an art to get it just right, but it works really well. So for our dragon turtle, I'm just going to do, again, just some quick assembly, just test fitting. You can see that piece actually fit pretty well. Very little gapping. And of course I haven't cleaned up any edges or anything, so very little gapping, very exciting. Now there is, you can see here, a lot of play in this back aspect. That should be nice and tight to stamp into there, which it is not. So this definitely will need to be boiled as well. I'm actually going to boil all of them, but that should sit nice and tight in there, which it's not. We've got that little bit of gapping going on. But anyhow, once we get that in there, then we can go through and test fit things like our tail. How does the tail fit in? So a little bit of gapping. So we'll have to be mindful and think of where do we need to pop in some thoughts for green stuff. But also looking at the edges, are there any lines that are pushing out that need cleaned up? Of course, we'll clean up all the mold lines, but are there any aspects that are preventing that from sitting tight? And I wouldn't say that's the mold line per se. I think that's more just how it's sculpted, because it does have that tail texture going into that hole. So that looks like a sculpting choice where the tail comes out and then swells a little bit, which is cool. Now for the fins, you want to go through and match the holes for the fins. Of course, they'll all have set shapes. So you want to look and see, does that shape match? Is it the same shape? And for us, it is this one here. Good fit. And this one here. Good fit. Want to look and see, is there anything that hangs out where we're able to see those kind of pin areas. Now when I'm separating these out, I use a clipper, because if you like try to twist or anything, you're going to take more material out of the aspect you don't want to take it out. So I use a clipper to separate them, and then I go through with a hobby knife to clean that up. So again, just popping this in. Now this one's really, really loose compared to the others. Part of that's because it goes in the aspect where the shell top and bottom connect. So pretty loose. This one actually a little bit firmer, which is nice. So there so far, let me move our, is the bottom of the dragon turtle and the top of the dragon turtle. Oh, I'm dying to paint this one. This is such a good mini. Some of the details that they've put on there. Look at the barnacles all over it. So cool. A lot of detailing. I do wish those were a little smoother, but for a miniature this large, it's really pretty common so that people can paint quickly, do a wash and then a dry brush. It picks up and highlights those details, so you can tell the sculptors were really mindful of the painting. Same with all the texturing on the skin. Rather than having people have to paint that texture, they've actually sculpted it in. So you could do a base coat paint, a wash, and then a dry brush, and really quickly have a very beautifully painted miniature. Now the last aspect that we're going to pop in here is the head. And if it's pretty close, a little bit of extra push would probably be required. Now there is a little bit of gapping. We could clean that up with some green stuff pretty easy, but overall not too bad. There is your dragon turtle. So cleanup yet to go, but what a very beautiful and awesome miniature from Reaper Miniatures. Not available in the retail yet, but I know it's coming. That, of course, would sit on the base, which I don't want to turn it too much just because I don't want those little bits and elements to fall out. Maybe we'll do this aspect first. Get it in there and then in there. So there would be your dragon turtle. Kind of, ooh. Yeah, the weight on this one. This is one where you probably would want to put a pin in that stand there, just because it's got, that turtle itself is very heavy. You could also put this on a bigger base, weight it, and have it be a little bit more stable, but it's got a little bit of wobble to it, so it probably wouldn't hurt to put a brass or steel pin through this stand here, just to make sure that it's nice and stable. But a beautiful sculpt, ready for some cleanup and a boil. Luckily, the majority of what needs boiled is on the base. Even though I'm going to do the boil to get that one aspect in the back kind of tightened up, overall the base needs more boiling than anything else. So super, super exciting. Now you could manipulate that as well with, just super glue and hold it or clamp it to be able to do it, but I find that pardon me, generally it's easier to do the boil method, so you've got the proper fit right from the get-go. You don't have to manipulate anything, you don't have to clamp anything, and it goes nice and fast. So that's just my input on it. All right, let's go back to our miniature here. So we've got that black, still wet in a few areas, but now I really want to go through and just look for areas where the black did not apply really well, and just give it a real good once over. I see a couple of small pinhole sizes where the paint did not apply, or I missed, basically. It's not that the paint didn't apply, it's just that I missed some areas. So I just want to go through and touch those up. Anywhere where I don't have real good opacity in the black, I want to make sure that I get real good opacity. That's the good thing about painting the base coat with a lighter color, is for the black really allows me to see if I've missed anything. And like I said, not much. It's pretty good. There we go. Now, using the black, what I want to do is go through and highlight, or not highlight, highlight is not the right word I want to use. I want to pre-paint some of the sunken areas. And by that, I mean things like under the shoulder pads, these pauldrons. I want to paint that black just because as we go through and then highlight or actually paint things like the bones and the pauldrons and things like that, we've got a good solid base of dark color that's going to automatically give us dark shading. Again, this miniature I want to be pretty dark, so I'm going to go ahead and pre-paint these deep areas with my black. And again, as we paint the miniature out, things like the armor and the bones, we'll be pulling it from the black shadowed recesses. Those black shadowed recesses are going to help give us some of that tone that we want. And I'm not going to do that for the primary character, the elf. I am doing that specifically for the skeletal warriors that are rising. Because our primary character, I want her to be more vibrant and bright. I want her to stand out from the setting and the scenery. On some of them, like there on the gauntlet area, that will look more like black lining when all is said and done. Again, some of these areas are pretty challenging to get to. Especially with my shaky hands. But again, I'm not worried about super clean. This is just about getting these deep areas placed. Oh, if I crooked a hair on my brush, I may have to clip that out. Darn it. Let's give it a good clean real quick and see if I can't get that back into shape. I just want to set the deepest, darkest areas in shadow. Oop, I see another spot of ghoul skin here on the base. I'm going to touch that real quick. Just while I'm looking at it. Better get it. Better get it. Now this is, of course, in early stages, your miniatures tend to go through a lot of different, I call them stages of ugly. Don't get discouraged. Press on. Keep pushing. Keep driving. Boy, the inside area on this side is a little challenging to get. Maybe. No. May have to. Oh, there we got it. I believe we got it. There we go. It's just those deep areas that we want to cover. Anywhere it's a deep shadowed area that we want to have the painted elements come out of and really separate from. The beautiful thing about this is you can go through with washes and give some tone to these deep, dark, shadowed areas. Again, depending on the colors you want to convey. Wash it with like a purple for kind of a, or green, either or, I think for kind of a magical, unnatural tone prior to painting up the armor bits. This one I'm really looking forward to. Getting to some of the detail work. As I'm thinking about colors and things like that, I know I'm going to have the armor be non-metallic metal, but then rusted and rusty in appearance. But then you have to start thinking about that. What colors are you going to have these bits of cloth and hanging material? How are you going to make them differentiate and look old and aged? Do you go with things like purples to have kind of a elegant royal theme to it? I'm actually thinking about having them be blues. To be almost like Crusader warrior aspect, where they've got dirty whites and blues. But I don't know, red is always such a good one. But I'm thinking of keeping her in red, so I don't want to emulate that on the soldiers. I could go green with the material, which would set off from that red really well and have good contrast colors from her dress to the fabrics that the skeletons have on them. Could go more with like burlappy colors, so tans. I don't know, it's hard to say. Hard to say. But that's pretty much all of our deep areas. Well, let's do this one little bit on this vambrace here. It's a pretty deep element. Pop some black in there. There we go. Oh, of course, at this one's neckline. Oh, you can see a bad wobble there. Those shaky hands are getting me today. All right, there we go. All the deep areas. I feel pretty good about what I've gotten on the base. I'll use up some of that black. I'm actually going to go through and just do some of the outer elements. Now it's very probable that I'll rub some of this off as I'm painting. Not too worried about that because I can go through and touch it up with black, because this lower area I'm just going to keep black. But it's less of a waste of the paint that I've got on there on my wet palette. Because I don't have another miniature that I need this black with, I just want to use it up. While we're doing that, I am going to go ahead and get a couple of browns going, because I'm going to do the handles. Get a paper towel here because I want to let that base dry really well. Fold this over a little bit and use this to pick up a little bit. Again, this is something that I can do. It's not going to be super clean, but with my hand shaking really bad, I can do this pretty easily, and it won't detract from the miniature. It'll actually work really well with the miniature. So working on the sword handles. Another element that as we paint the swords, which we'll do non-metallic metal and then rust them up, the handles will be pretty done. And one more element of completion. Now there are a couple of them that are on the ground, or near the ground I should say, not elevated or being held by animated skeletons. So those will be the ones that I work with first. And I want to be a little careful just because I want this paint to be in the right area. I don't want it on the ground. And into the skeleton holding one. Now the one that's on the ground that's being held by the skeletal arm, the fingers on that one are not bony. So it's not skeleton fingers. So my assumption is, in the way I'm going to paint it, that that is being held by a gauntleted skeleton hand. So we'll actually use some leather colors to paint that aspect of it. But for this sword, well, all of them, I want to give these handles a compressed leather look, kind of like a K-bar knife is what I'm thinking. Now this one here is definitely leather wrapped, so I'm just going with a very dark brown, and the brown I used is wood stain brown. And my goal is, once that is nice and dry, I'm going to use a shield brown and touch it up a little bit. Then I'm going to actually do a black wash before going back with the wood stain brown and then the shield brown, and then eventually some driftwood brown for the edges. That's going to make it look a little old and aged, and should be pretty good. Now those black elements are drying pretty well. I'm pretty happy with where they're at so far. And a little bit left to go on some of the newer areas around the skeleton. But in preparation for that, I want to prep up some base tone. That I want to use. That is going to be I gotta find it now. Starting with khaki highlight. Now this is where I'm going to really test my patience. Put a couple of drops of that on my wet palette. I suppose before I do that, now that those edges are done, I'm going to go back to my black that I have on my palette and just finish out these edges where I've been holding it. Just for good completion. I'll give that black near the rib cages a little bit more to dry. See, I already hampered myself grabbing on there. That's okay. Now with that khaki, what I want to do is actually start painting some of the bone work. Again, this is where I'm going to be testing myself, because some of the bones, especially the ones in the ground and in her hand, are going to be a little more challenging to paint steadily. So we'll see how my frustration level holds up. And you can see this is very close to the ghoul highlight that we used to paint, or ghoul flesh that we used to base coat the miniature. So very, very similar in tone and color. So it's not going to stand out super well comparatively. But I am just looking at getting a base coat applied. And I can build up my skeleton whites on top of. And what I want to do is just paint any bone that I can with this khaki highlight. And I'm not going to get them all. Again, I've got uber shaky hands today. I'm not going to do that arm that's holding on to the leg because I'm going to paint her leg first. And this is just about taking advantage of what I can do today. Some of them, like the fingers here, a little more challenging. Because I don't want to paint the rock, we've got black, I just want to get a base coat. And this is just taking up some time, getting some paint applied, while we're waiting for all of the black to dry. So I know it's not going to be perfect. But it's going to allow me to have a base coat that I can then start building some colors on as we continue to paint. One less thing that I'll have to paint later. Or paint as much of. Of course, with all the multiple layers of this miniature, touch-ups will be required. We'll have to go back through and touch up here and there as we paint additional elements on the miniature. This one's going to be a little more challenging because it's sunken back in here a little bit. And when we painted the base with black, painted quite a bit of this arm bone with black as well. But this will clean up our edges a little bit. Really define that bone. Even though we'll cover it again, most likely as we're dry brushing, it gives us that base to build on. And this one has just a little bit of bone disappearing under the boot and ground. And then a skull here. That as carefully as possible. And then this skull here. Also try to edge that one very carefully. And those eye sockets really nice. Now for these skulls, we're going to go through and do a lot of washes on them. To really make them stand out and drive some realism to them. But we're getting a good start on the bones. And we're not going to do the skull that she is holding. Well, yeah, let's go ahead and do the skull that she's holding as well, after we do the bones of that skeleton. And because I do want to do the bones first, some of them are a little bit more challenging. This one here kind of disappears under the fabric before disappearing into the boot. Which I suppose we should do those boots actually with some black to drive those shadows deep. come back to those elements of it. And again, in some of the armholes, you have a little bit. Oh, there's some ribs there as well. You have some ribs that show. Let's see if we can show them here on camera very well. This one here I did not paint yet. So let's try to see. You can see on the camera a little bit where those ribs are. Now this one I did not paint with the black first to dry those shadows in, so I'm going to touch that up and get that black put in there. Dry those shadows down. That way when we do paint those ribs, they stand out really well. Now I did on this side, still drying a little bit. It's probably the biggest challenge when you're working on these larger minis is the layers upon layers upon layers. There's so much to do. These types of minis take a long time to complete, but very worth it. These are your display minis that you want to take a long time with. You want to really spend the time doing those layers upon layers, because ultimately these are the ones that you're going to put on your display case, really show massive detail amounts, different techniques, highlight your coloring. So this type of a miniature, don't think about being able to get it done in one sitting. Take your time, enjoy it. Paint on it for a session, for a painting session, and walk away and don't touch it for a week or two. Then come back to it. These are the types of minis that I tell people, take your time, because this is going to be a showstopper. These are the types of minis where every hour you spend on it, you're going to discover a new feature on the miniature. Something that the sculptor put in there that you're going to be able to really highlight and call attention to. In my opinion, that's what it's all about. Bringing that sculptor's vision to life. The sculptors are so good at what they do, creating these amazing miniatures for us to paint and enjoy. How can we not take our time and just wow them? By picking up what they've given us and running with it. This back one's a little challenging. Awkward angle for sure. Gonna have to steady my hand a little bit here. As we pick up all those bones. And we've got that skull left to do for our initial base coat. See how we doing on time. Oh wow, we went way over an hour. Well, if you were able to stick with it, I appreciate it. I'm going to finish this skull. And then we will call it a day. Now this video will be posted to our YouTube channel. If you are watching this as a VOD, make sure you send a message and let us know what your vote is for what we're going to be painting next. And then we will also be watching on YouTube to see what the votes are. So I am not going to start that, so the voting is basically going to stay open, I guess is a better way to say it, through Labor Day. So it'll be the weekend after Labor Day when we tally up the votes and see what we are going to be painting in masse, en masse. Then, because with ReaperCon coming, I have got to attend that and be focused on that, and that is going to take up a lot of time through Labor Day weekend. And then after ReaperCon, as we are coming back to the studio, getting things back together, and prepping to resume regular operating procedures here, we will then tally up all the votes, see what we are going to be painting on next, make an announcement, then get busy on it. So more to come, much more to come. I hope this was interesting. I know very different from what we normally do, so I hope it was interesting and maybe even a little enlightening. I don't know if I'm going to be working on this off camera or not. I can't say. And my hands have a lot of shakes today, so we will see. But I'm definitely happy to start getting some paint on it. And of course, once it's all done, it's going to take quite a bit of time, but once it is all done, we're going to be posting it up on our Instagram. Make sure to check it out there. Until next week, enjoy, keep those brushes wet, and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.